Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Blockchain Banter Unpopular Opinions, DeFi Debates and Hot Takes. I am here with DeFi Cheetah, Joshua Baker of Aori, and Mark Richardson of Bancor and CarbonDeFi. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and thank you to everybody in the audience for joining us as well.
Thank you, Jen.
Hey.
Hey, DeFi Cheat, I know that you might have to cut out a little bit early today. So if you do, I appreciate you coming up here and joining us for the time being.
Sure. Thank you for today.
Of course. So, Josh, last week we kind of jumped with a tweet that I saw of yours, and this week I'm going to do the same. I'm going to bring attention first. I'm going to pin something to the top. Before we really jump into it, though, I know the majority of DeFi users are familiar with MEV. But for those that aren't, maybe one of you might be able to give us a brief explanation of what MEV is. I'd like to kind of define the different types of MEV and then get into this tweet that I'm going to pin at the moment.
Yeah, maybe I'll give like a technical definition and then like perhaps a pragmatic definition. One
Sure.
second. Sorry, but that was just turning something down. So the technical definition is, of course, miner extractable value, which doesn't really make much sense on Ethereum anymore because we don't really have miners anymore. We have validators. But it comes from this idea of basically bribing the block builder or the validator to include your transaction, especially if it's in a certain position, to make more profit than you otherwise would have, or to capture on some kind of like opportunity that you otherwise couldn't have if you didn't have some kind of ability to bribe your location in the block or in the mempool. So, like for example, if you've ever gone on Uniswap and you've bid up on MetaMask your gas, that was in a very tiny way. That was MEV, where you were just like, your goal was expedience, and so you bid up your gas and you got executed faster. Pretty straightforward in that sense. What it means in like a practical sense, and like how you see people actually just use gas bidding on chain, in a technical sense, is usually for one of three kinds of strategies. The first kind of strategy is probably one you guys are very familiar with, which is just sandwich attacking. This is front running and back running somebody on Uniswap. They actually have a cool like icon for it if you ever look on like Dex Screener when you're looking at like a real shitcoin. You guys have probably heard of like Jared from Subway. Like this is like his premier attack vector. He sees that your transaction's coming in, he bids to buy in front of you, and then he dumps on you right after. And it's instant profit for him with no risk. The second kind of attack vector is DEX arbitrage. So that's like if the price of SushiSwap and the price of Uniswap ETH are different, you can, bid up really high to get, be the first transaction in the block to make sure that you're the one who captures that arbitrage. And there's a whole bunch of math that goes into that that's super complicated about like, is your gas payment more expensive than the profit, and things like that. And then lastly, the least utilized of the three strategies in MEV today is sex dex arbitrage. So this is centralized to decentralized exchange arbitrage, and the reason that's difficult is because you have to have substantially more capital and a bigger team to do it. You have to have a team managing your centralized exchange trading. You have to have a team managing your block builder and your RPC, and then you also have to have a team that's managing your decentralized trading and your MEV on chain as well. So it's quite intensive. So really, you only see like a couple of like prop shops that are really able to do this. Like the two biggest are like Jump and Wintermute. If you want to see a really cool thread on this, I'd highly recommend checking out at Special Mech. At Special Mech, MECH at the end. put out a thread very recently showing like the rise of what these are like so-called prop builders who are just doing MEV. And so yeah, this is having a huge effect on the Ethereum ecosystem right now. So yeah, that's kind of the I guess if I had to give like a 1 or 2 minute definition, yeah.
Cool. Mark or Cheetah, do either of you guys have anything you want to add to that?
I don't think that. I'll go ahead, DeFi.
Basically, I think there would be one kind of attack also counted as a kind of MEV, which is the JIT, which is for some people who find a very large transaction and they would like to kind of get most of the transaction fee of that transaction. So basically, they provide the liquidity purely for earning the transaction fee from the particular trade, and this kind of thing also kind of MEV. But I think in generally it could be a good stuff, especially because it could kind of minimize the slippage for traders, but from the LP's perspective, they are kind of being front run by people who do not have to pay the time value of the capital, but manage to capture most of the trading fee because it is targeted for that particular trade or something. Yeah. So basically, just would like to add this kind of particular MEV attack. But yeah, Mark, you can continue.
Yeah, I think I kind of wanted to expand a little bit on what Josh said, what he categorized as kind of his pragmatic definition. And I think we can take a look just a little, like even one step further, which is that in a way, MEV is kind of given this convenient label as being all of this, like all of the value that people feel that they might have been entitled to had they made better decisions. And a lot of I've really enjoyed some of Josh's berserker mode in IL and things like that recently. I think he's really found a terrific voice in CT, and I think a lot of people are resonating with it. And I don't mean this in jest at all. I think it's absolutely terrific. But yeah, there was a thread recently that basically was saying that IL in a way is just making a bad trade. And I think that we kind of slapped this MEV label on that. It's like, well, if everyone was given what they were due, then that value should go back to LPs or something like that. But that's kind of not at all how markets really operate. I think that if I was to take even JIT liquidity in a way, I think is kind of fair in it. Like there's nothing morally or ethically objectionable about it. I think the only one that's really malicious is sandwich attacks. But all other forms of MEV, I think, are just people that are are playing the game better than those who aren't, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. I'm actually going to pin Josh's tweet that you were just referring to also. So speaking of pinned tweets, up on the top, I pinned one. I think this is this was what the inspiration, or this was the inspiration behind Josh's tweet that I'm going to post. And it's your rebuttal, right, Josh?
Yeah.
But the up here, right, is MEV is normalizing and enabling theft on chain. So this was a huge thread by a well-known founder of a DeFi protocol. Lots of comments, lots of engagement, lots of opinions, right? And you obviously had your own. So maybe we can speak to, is MEV normalizing, enabling theft on chain? I think we heard a little bit of your opinions, and we can kind of elaborate on that as well. In addition to, there are different types of MEV. Like you said, Mark, it's kind of become this convenient term. So I'd like to kind of build on that. Josh, let's hear your initial thoughts while I pin your tweet to the top.
Yeah, and thank you for the kind words, Mark. I appreciate it a ton. My kind of take on it is that no, it's not theft. This is like a huge argument in TradFi too. This is like an unsolvable argument, right? I totally recognize that. This happens a lot with like latency arbitrage wars in TradFi. You see, it actually came up in the news again recently with like DRW and Jump. trying to buy the rights to certain like radio frequencies to get like 1 millisecond faster trade time. It's pretty crazy, but my basic take is that it isn't theft. And if you go through like the thread comments, you'll see like a lot of what I refer to in the second tweet of just like people say that like MEV is theft. They say it's like this inevitable like thing, and like they also talk a lot about like flash loans, which are kind of only correlated to MEV. And then like they give like some suggestions for alternatives, but like I feel like they're just missing the thing we talk about every week. Yeah, so I'll just touch on like the first. The fourth point is something we talk about a lot here, so I'll skip that one. But like MEV's theft is almost kind of like a ridiculous idea when you think about it, because you signed up, you LP'd, you understand that like the whole point of LPing into an AMM is that like you understand that you are agreeing to be the liquidity for every trade. Like you agree that every single transaction in the mempool, a new XYZ K curve will be calculated, and you will be the top of book. You will always be there to fill that order, whatever trades come in. And to assume that like just because someone realizes that like they can arbitrage your pre-announced guarantee to everyone else, it's so ridiculous. It's like you're openly telling people that like I'm going to provide liquidity here, and then people are like, okay, well I will take you up on that. I will take this trade. That's just an honest transaction between two people who are saying that like they're going to make a transaction together. And then to go back and look on it and say, hey, wait a second, that's actually not fair, because in hindsight, I lost some money. Or I could have made more money, but I didn't. Give it back. It's kind of ridiculous. So that's kind of my take on the like MEV is theft idea. There's also this concept of like MEV being like this inevitable thing. This will always happen on chain, but like you notice that like myself and Cheetah and Mark, and we were all kind of giving examples of MEV. Every single MEV topic had to do with fucking AMM. Pardon my French. Every single thing had to do with an AMM. It's not. And my hot controversial take is that MEV is not. It's not an Ethereum problem. I believe that it's an AMM problem. It fundamentally only exists because we decided as a community to jam every single layer of the trading stack on chain, which does not like. I think like it ends up running into a lot of issues if you do it this way. Like it makes sense in some cases, but like unless you're doing like some kind of clob or clob hybrid like that, like if you're doing a pure AMM where the entire trading stack is entirely calculable based on an equation, like you inevitably will find these externalities like MEV that end up coming in and just biting you in the butt. And so that's really my like take on it. And then maybe the last point, we didn't touch on this in the MEV description, but it's this concept of like flash loans being evil. That's also like a big take in this thread, is that like flash loans are this horrible thing. I actually think flash loans are like one of the best features in DeFi. Flash loans are beautiful because they effectively allow you to, if you can, it allows Ethereum to become a truly meritocratic place where if you are a good enough trader and you find a good enough arbitrage, you do not need to have $100 million sitting in a bank account. You could have $0. As long as you have enough gas to borrow that loan, then you have the ability to make as profitable of a trade as Wintermute can, or as Jump can, or as Citadel can. And to me, that's like so beautiful. It's like now you can truly trade based on your merit rather than your capital restrictions. And with no risk to the person who's lending to you too, which is just so beautiful. And they cite like the fact that like sometimes there are situations where hackers will use flash loans to make to hack. I actually think that like all flash loans do in the situation of a hack is actually just speed things up. They speed up the inevitable, as we saw with like the CRV hack recently, with the reentrancy guard bug. The flash loan hackers actually like almost had no chance. Like people just ended up like crushing them, outbidding them, and it became a war of like who's willing to pay more gas, really. So I think even then it like only is very situational when flash loans can actually even help a hacker. So that's kind of my like, that's maybe like the best argument against flash loans is like that they can speed up hacks, but they just have provided such a high value and so much benefit to crypto that I just cannot imagine like that the best democratizing or distributed like tool in crypto would be a bad thing. So yeah, that's maybe like my quick TLDR. Yeah.
Mark or Cheetah, do you guys want to speak on any of the points that Josh made before we kind of hone in on one?
I didn't really spend a lot of time with that thread, but I'm surprised that that flash loans were flagged as being something that's considered nefarious. I think that it's fair to observe that they, especially when they first were released, that they were like their predominant use case was attacking naive protocols that were reliant on liquidity pools for as a price oracle and that kind of thing, and all other kinds of weird games that you can play with them. But it's not the flash loan that is the problem, right? It's the design flaw in the protocol that's being exploited. And what's ironic is that if someone was to say, look at all the damage that flash loans do, anything that you can do with a flash loan, you can also do without a flash loan. So it doesn't really matter, right? The flash loan isn't the thing that causes the problem. The problem just is. And whether or not that allows other people access to that flaw via a flash loan is irrelevant. The ambition should be to make sure that protocols are designed without those kinds of flaws in them.
Cheetah, what's your take on this? Do you see flash loans as a sort of nefarious transaction, or?
Actually, I think flash loan is a kind of innovative way of doing the kind of atomic swap between the stuff which would not be able to happen in the traditional finance, but it also causes a lot of attack to different protocols because of the lowering threshold of the attackers. I think it's more about the give and take, because I think if there is no flash loan, then there may be some activities that could be done would not be able to done today, but at the same time it causes some other troublesome stuff that mentioned by Josh. So yeah, I think it's more about a matter of choice or something.
And what about arbitrage? I mean, I think, Mark, you've said this on previous calls, right? That a sandwich attack is a sort of a predatory transaction, right?
Well, sandwich attacks, again, sandwich attacks are really just speaking to a flaw that's been built into the way that these deterministic pricing models work. Because there are ways that you can get around sandwich attacks. The min return function, I think, is generally pretty acceptable. It's unfortunate that in most cases, whatever you set the min return to be, that's exactly what you'll get, because the sandwich attacker can make sure that you don't get a penny more than what than what's required to forfeit the transaction. But a sandwich attack definitely is malicious. But the fact that it can be performed isn't the fault of the sandwich attacker, right? You can't just ask people politely to please not sandwich attack people. It's a much better idea or a much better ambition to develop a protocol that doesn't have sandwich attack issues built into it. But arbitrage will always be there. Like, I consider at some level every single trade is a type of arbitrage trade, right? Like, when someone goes to the store and they see an iPhone on discount or something and they go, wow, it's only this number of dollars. I was expecting to pay more than that, so I'm going to buy this thing. In a way, that store could have priced that iPhone higher, and made more money out of that transaction. And so the person who bought that thing is kind of arbitraging that item against some internal price expectation that they had for it. This is a lot more abstract than the type of arbitrage that people are talking about, but it means the same thing. And coming back to a point that Josh was talking about earlier, when someone says, "Yo, I wish you didn't trade with me because now the price is higher, and so if I sold it to you now, I would have made more money." It's like, well, too bad, right? You decided to sell at a different price, and neither one of us exploited the other one. Any more than if you buy a house from someone and then 12 months later it's worth 50% more. Would you be upset if that person came back and said, "Hey, look, the housing prices have all moved up 50%. You owe me some money now," or wrote you an angry letter saying that they felt that they were exploited by the fact that they advertised their house at too cheap of a price and that you happened to buy it? It just doesn't make sense. It's just a bad argument. I think arbitrage is a totally natural, totally healthy way for a market to flourish. And I think one of the things that people get upset about is this apparent presence where people who aren't providing liquidity and who are just trading between these different decentralized exchanges or between decentralized exchanges and centralized exchanges seem to be having like a parasitic influence, right? Like, if they are making money in that process, then it's like, well, where did that money come from? And we assume that it comes from, for example, the liquidity provider. But that's actually a terrible assumption. And I've made this case before. If someone creates an arbitrage opportunity by trading on, say, SushiSwap, and an arbitrageur then closes an arbitrage opportunity between SushiSwap and Uniswap, who lost their money? Like, who was exploited? Who has the greatest right to be upset? Because really, the trader, the person who created the arbitrage opportunity in the first place, has equal claim to having lost money, but it was their own fault, right? No one made them trade on SushiSwap. They should have used 1inch or OpenOcean or any of these other aggregators that would have at least potentially not resulted in them getting a bad price quote. But they have only themselves to blame. And if we say, well, okay, whatever, traders will make bad decisions, but somehow LPs are more entitled to that value, I also want to push back against that. Because if the claim then is that the fair thing to do is that person who made that bad trading decision to swap exclusively on Uniswap or SushiSwap rather, but instead split their transaction to get the best possible price, then there would be no the actual effect that the LP gets is no different to if they just wait for the arbitrage to happen. So arbitrage, in my opinion, is like it is the weirdest thing that people get upset about, and I think it's just because they think that because value is moving into the hands of arbitrageurs, that somehow means that that's value that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And in a way, that's true, but it's mostly true from the trader's perspective. The people that actually create arbitrage opportunities are the people that are losing money. For LPs, they shouldn't care, right? It's not any value that they would have had or been entitled to regardless. It's just the mistakes of others who cause imbalances in the system that then result in some make an equilibration necessary is where that value kind of gets extracted from. It's not. It's bizarre to me that people feel this sense of entitlement that they that somehow that value belonged to them.
It's cope. It's cope. They're bad traders. It's cope.
Is it a lack of education for users. Josh, in the beginning, you were saying that,
Yeah.
they openly,
Oh, sorry. Please
right?
finish.
I'm
I was
sorry.
saying please finish. Sorry.
Oh, no. That's okay. No, I was just going back to what you were saying in the beginning, when you were kind of explaining your reaction to this thread, right? And you were saying that users are openly, or LPs are openly agreeing to trade at every single price point, right? To make themselves available for these trades. So, I mean, are they actually aware of what they're doing? Because I'm not convinced that they are.
Yeah, I don't think they are either, actually. This is like the most depressing thing, and I don't think it's because like people are dumb or anything like that. Like I'm not like, like some kind of depressing, like, all people are stupid person. Like I actually think this is entirely a problem of the people who are most well known for advertising. The people who are most well known for advertising AMMs have tried to hide this fact. Um, I mean, there's a reason that a certain group put out a certain academic paper saying that there were no losses associated. Like if there was a Uniswap pool where there were only arbitrages, that pool would be profitable for LPs. And they had to do some mental gymnastics for that one. But yeah, I think this is fundamentally an issue that the people who are really behind, the people who really succeed when AMMs succeed, they have tried really hard to make sure you don't know this information. So I think it's almost been like hidden from people, rather than people being stupid or anything like that. I don't believe most people are stupid, especially not most people in crypto. So yeah.
Why do you guys think that, half the industry, or, a majority is stuck on AMMs being that final sort of product in DeFi, to where they're, go ahead, Mark.
A couple of reasons. I think first of all, the people that are in, I don't want to say in control of the narrative, because I think that's a little bit too tinfoil hat wearing. But let's say that the people with enough resources to sort of influence the narrative in crypto. And this isn't necessarily AMMs themselves or decentralized exchanges in general, but also token projects, right? They have kind of a dependence on that infrastructure, because if you're trying to launch a successful token project, you know that you want liquidity for it, and liquidity is super expensive. And if you've just started a brand new token contract and you've got all of these millions of tokens that you can't do anything with because it's not like you can sell them on Coinbase or Binance or whatever, offering them as incentives to your users in order to bootstrap liquidity for you versus ETH or versus a stable or whatever is literally like just creating value out of nothing, right? It's I think it wears this it has this kind of veneer of being community building, but really it's kind of a way for projects to sort of bring in this kind of slave labor, and get them to and throw incentives at them in order to bootstrap token economies from nothingness. Which is, I don't, I've said it many times that I don't really like the idea of community acquired liquidity. I prefer the idea of projects providing that liquidity themselves. But the point that I'm arriving at is that the AMM is an absolutely perfect device to achieve this. And so even if you're not an AMM project, if you're a new meme coin or, social community currency, whatever, all of these other use cases are for cryptocurrencies, you kind of want AMMs to be popular, and you want people to like them, and you want people to provide liquidity with them, because it is so convenient, right? You can get from nothing to something very, very quickly with an AMM, whereas if you're doing it via a traditional market, via traditional marketplace methods, it might take a little bit longer, and it certainly won't be as lucrative in terms of what you can do with the tokens that you've just printed for yourself.
You're definitely correct. I would always agree that, like, the initial markets of a token should always be AMMs. It's just the high market caps is where it gets a little. That's where those crazy papers come into play.
Exactly. For the really prominent cryptocurrency tokens, I don't even think AMMs are all that relevant. Anything that's getting tens of millions of dollars in daily volume on centralized exchanges, I don't think AMMs bring all that much to the table. There are some differences here, and we should also recognize the other benefits that AMMs bring. For example, a lot of things that that projects and communities want to do on chain often require something like an Oracle price. And even with really great Oracle projects, they don't have prices for everything. And if you've got a complex ecosystem with dozens or hundreds of different tokens in it, it is often more convenient. In fact, it's the only practicable solution is to try and use something like a Uniswap V2 pool to try and measure the price of stuff. And so it does provide some aspect of the infrastructure that way as well, including to things like lending protocols, by the way. But the question is like at what cost? Like if we told liquidity providers that the reason they're providing liquidity is so that some of this other infrastructure could correctly operate, and that it's not necessarily for the benefit of their personal financial situation, I wonder if they would continue to do it. Sure, I think many probably would. Like, I do know a lot of people, including people with significant capital on chain, that aren't really expecting their positions in AMMs to make them any money. But the reason they do it is because they like the idea of lending markets continuing to operate correctly, and there might be a price feed on that particular token that's required for some other integration or whatever, which is fine. But whether or not we consider that the type of activity or the motivation for participating in that type of activity that motivates the masses, I think is definitely debatable.
I'm going to put another one to the top. I want to kind of bring our focus to another topic that I saw, and it was a question. Too few people have asked the question, what if composability doesn't scale? What if stacking protocols on top of protocols with a complex web of constantly changing incentives and mechanisms creates unmanageable tail risks? I'm going to pin that to the top, but I'm curious if you guys have thought about this and what your thoughts are.
Well, that's kind of just like making the most obvious statement ever, which is it turns out when you put a lot of when you stack things on top of each other, it gets a little more complicated, or you have like a Jenga tower and you stack a bunch of pieces up, and once you start trying to finagle with like different orders and whatnot, it's more likely to fall. Yeah, good analysis, Einstein. I would suggest maybe it probably needs like a better example, right? Like there's definitely examples in crypto of like good ideas of protocols stacking on top of one another, like perhaps looking at like DEX aggregators, like things like CowSwap, for example, which on the back end are DEX aggregators. Maybe also even looking at like things like Morpho, where they're doing like lending aggregation and lending stacking with their own proprietary like thing on top as well. Like I think that's quite cool. When done, I mean, it's like any product. When done well, it can be amazing. When done poorly, it can be bad. Composability. I think one area of composability that maybe like people don't talk about enough is like being a bad idea, or like not a bad idea. Let's be clear. Just like one that I wish had taken off more than it has so far is just like LP token reusing or reusability. That to me does seem like kind of a cool idea, although it does add more leverage into the system potentially. But yeah, it's super case dependent. Mark, Cheetah.
Yeah, I think composability is one of these weird terms that's kind of like bled into crypto and blockchain development and has replaced a perfectly good term. I think it at least for the context of this conversation, in software development, which is dependencies, right? Like it's okay to have things that are operating with each other nicely and sort of, build something that cooperates well with another protocol. But you really want to keep the amount of dependencies that your specific thing has to an absolute minimum. In the case of blockchain development, in the best case scenario, the only dependency that you should have is the underlying blockchain itself. Now, as things become like increasingly interconnected, there's usually a little bit more dependencies that sort of creep in. Like I said, the Uniswap price oracle system is extremely prevalent in this kind of thing. But then it means that there's like an aspect to the system that you've built that's now entirely out of your control. A good example of where, like, if you want to find out just how bad this stuff gets, is if you go back to sort of the like 2005 to 2010 era for Linux distributions. It was actually really hard to get like a really good stable build of something. I remember during my honors year, I was trying to get this this program called XBASI to work for measuring like intermolecular distances in proteins, and essentially like there was no Linux build that could run it because of the number of dependencies in C that you would have to sort of like build into your system in order to make it run. So there was like this really great open source software that's like free to use. You can just get it and run it on your machine. But then the first thing it would give you is like 100,000 error messages of all of the other programs that you need to install in order to make it run. And it was a nightmare. And this, I think, is the scalability limit that you might be referring to, Jen, is that, at some point, if some of these protocols become deprecated or hacked or whatever, or maybe they just like fade into obsolescence, that means that the protocols that are dependent on them will either need to be updated, upgraded, or face the same fate. And so, yeah, this idea of composability, it's kind of limited, but it's only if your protocol's activities are actually dependent on that composability. So if it's just something that's kind of that you get for free, like as an extra, like the ability to, lend your LP tokens out on Aave or something like that, like I don't consider that a dependency. That's just like a additional utility, and that's fine. But something that's dependent on something else, like we know that there's this entire tower of protocols that's built on top of Curve. I'm not even sure how tall it is anymore, but I remember when I was looking at it, this time probably 2 years ago, there were at least 4 or 5 different protocols, and the one at the top is dependent on all 4 layers underneath it. And that kind of composability is, I would say, is facing that kind of dependency hell. Whereas, if you've just got the ability to take an ERC20 token and do something else in another protocol, that's not a problem. That's something that can probably scale indefinitely.
So something that they had written was, in a sense, it destroys more value than it creates.
Actually, in my opinion, I think it is a matter of the balance to be struck between the capital efficiency and the security. I think it is a spectrum that of the level of composability. If I think composability is not really a spectrum, but dependency is. So what I mean is that the key characteristic of DeFi is that it is very composable. That means capital in one place could be somehow reused in another place somehow more effectively. But what I try to argue is that this kind of feature could be managed, but if some good risk measure takes in. For example, like if you have, for example, if 2 protocols collaborate with each other, and it is a matter of how they would like to have exposure to the potential risk of another by, for example, setting a cap of the amount of TVL to be exposed to another protocol. I think this is something that that could be done at the end of the day, because you can't say because there are risks, so you deny the advantages of the favorable conditions that are created by a certain feature. Yeah, I think all sort of stuff have certain risks. For example, smart contract risk. Whenever you interact with any protocols or smart contract, you would have exposed yourself to that kind of risk. But that doesn't mean that you step out from taking part in the kind of activities simply because there is a presence of this kind of risk. I think it's more about how those risks are being managed instead of because of those kind of risks. That simply makes some critics jump into the conclusion that because of that, oh, so that's why it is bad. I think it is a sweeping statement, a bit jumpy conclusion based on just simply based on the fact that there is a presence of that kind of risk. Because yeah, I think this kind of risk should rather be managed instead of being completely avoided by denying the composability or trying to treat each protocol as a isolated island so that there won't be that kind of risk to be present.
So in the last tweet that I pinned, they're talking about kind of innovation being at a dead end and everyone thinking about how they can improve Uniswap versus, with fancy mechanisms and incentives. And while doing that, we increase the systemic risk of all of DeFi. And we had kind of spoken about this a little bit. And Josh, you were on this call. Cheetah, you might have actually been on this call as well when we were talking about Uni v4 and the hooks, right? And everybody kind of seeing this as a positive thing. But is this increase in the systemic risk of all of DeFi, are hooks a good thing? Is building on top of this AMM going to be something that you see as a positive move for the industry?
Ooh, did I cut out?
No, you're still good.
In my opinion, I think in some sense it could boost the convenience of people to kind of instead of sorting out different liquidity venues. You mean Uni v4, right? For Uni v4, I think the marginal the potential presence of terrorists may outweigh the benefits that it has because of the fact that the gas optimization may not be something that is of paramount significance if it falls below a certain level. And I think comparatively, it is more about if you're saying hooks. I think I think again I would say it is not easy to say how people would like to build on Uniswap v4 if they could build on their own. I think I raised out this issue before, but yeah, I think for no matter for their own self interest or for whatever reasons, I think there would be some people willing to do that. But for those who are with some really interesting ideas, I think they may more inclined towards creating their own protocols to make to have less dependency on Uni v4 instead of being one of the kind of features that happen on Uni v4. So I think no matter from the incentive compatibility perspective or from the increment of terrorists causing the larger marginal cost than the increment of the marginal impact. From these two perspectives, I think, yeah, I understand why Uniswap will take this kind of action, but from the sector's perspective, I'm not really a fan of this. Yeah.
I'm not sure about it increasing tail risk. It might be true. Like if you're thinking about Uniswap as being a standalone product, but as I've said before, once these hooks, third-party hooks, start becoming available on Uniswap v4, you're basically just using someone else's protocol now. And maybe they're hoping to borrow from the the brand name that Uniswap represents. And I think it probably does make sense for some projects to view it that way. Like you might get a little bit more mileage out of a new protocol if you say that it's built on Uniswap v4. But it's really a farce, right? You're just using someone else's protocol and they just kind of slap the Uniswap label on it. It really doesn't make any difference. I think that the tail risk is exactly the same. But if you consider everything that's built on top of Uniswap v4 to be a part of Uniswap v4, which again, like I'm saying, I don't think that that's necessarily a good argument. But if that's the position that you take, then maybe the risk on for using Uniswap v4 dependent products is going to go up. But if they didn't do that and they said, and Uniswap v4 was actually something else, people would still create whatever it is they're going to create using these third-party hooks, and that would have the same tail risk or systemic risk built into DeFi that we would have without it. So I don't think that it changes it necessarily. It's kind of just creating a new pigeonhole to sort of push everything into, but it doesn't really matter how you categorize them. The risks are the same.
Josh, you asked if you cut out earlier, but you didn't actually get to respond to this one.
Actually,
maybe we have
think.
lost.
Oh, okay. Might go ahead.
No, I was just saying that I think maybe we have lost Josh. He mentioned something about dropping out, and now he's permanently
Forgive
muted.
me, I'm having internet issues.
Oh, you're fine. We heard that. Cheetah,
If you guys heard that.
Cheetah, you unmuted. Did you want to add to this?
So basically, my take is that I think in terms of the hooks perspective, I think from now on, I agree with the argument that if having a lot of stacks on one protocol, that may be a sort of issues. So I think it is kind of linked to the previous question, because when it comes to composability, it could be something like vertical, like one project built on top of another one. It also could be horizontal, like you provide liquidity for AMM, which could be collateralized to and have your capital in the lending protocol. So I think in terms of the horizontal kind of composability, I think it is completely fine. But if it is in terms of the vertical part, which I think UDV4 would be taking this kind of approach, trying to have projects to build on top of UDV4 structure. I think in that sense, it depends on the interaction of different projects, right? Because if there are some kind of overlapping of a lot of, for example, like tens of protocols using the same contract or in the same venue or whatever, in that sense, I think if there is any issue, for example, like if one day there are some bugs in Solidity, and it happens to be discovered by hackers on the UniV4, that kind of bug. I can't estimate how big the impact could be for builders who have their projects on top of UniV4. So I think this is the kind of concerns that I have.
Yeah, 100%. I think that the if anything, the 0-day exploit that we've seen recently with Viper is kind of speaking to exactly this point, right? Even if it's not protocols built on top of protocols built on top of protocols, you still have this kind of underlying dependency on at least the programming language that you use to deploy your smart contract, and then after that, the blockchain itself that it's built on. I think limiting the amount of exposure you have to things that you didn't create is always better than just taking what someone else has made and using it at face value and assuming that it's going to be fine. Like immutable contracts are great, and I think that if nothing else, Uniswap needs to be applauded for their strict adherence to immutable contracts, because at least you know that nothing's gonna change. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't some, unique flaw built into it. And even the best, developers in the world are going to miss stuff from time to time. Even with all of the bug bounties and everything else that we see, sometimes years pass before some attacker figures out a way to exploit a protocol. And if that protocol is at the bottom of a stack, then it could be that all of the ones above it are going to be similarly affected. And it's another reason why distributing things and having things be standalone might actually be preferable.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys
Can you guys hear me?
for joining. Yes. Add to it, Josh. Go ahead. We can hear you.
Hello, hello.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Josh.
Oh, sweet. All right, good. It reminds me of that meme it's like a bunch of blocks on top of one another, and then there's one like very thin block barely holding the whole stack up, and it says, dependency made by one guy in Nebraska in 1995 that he keeps maintained. Very, very similar. Many such cases.
So then really quickly before we end, when is enough in terms of composability?
Well, again, it depends on your perspective of composability. If it's what you can do with a token that you've been issued, I'm totally in favor of, giving people as many options as they want, right? And if a DEX gives you an LP token, and then you can put that LP token in a lending protocol and be issued some other token, and you want to do something with that, whatever. Like you can daisy chain these things together literally forever. And the protocols themselves aren't necessarily going to be, exposed to systemic risk until they get to the level where huge amounts of whatever the TVL of that protocol is actually was generated by or is somehow dependent on another protocol. But even then, that's just your consumer base making those decisions for you. And it could be that something like the cream exploit happens, which might affect something like Wi-Fi and these kinds of things. Like we do see these follow-on effects, but it's kind of different because it's mostly that the asset itself that was being composed between all of these protocols is at risk, not the protocols themselves. So with that aspect of composability, I'm very, very liberal. But with the idea of like interconnected protocols that actually are necessarily contingent on another protocol functioning correctly, this is something that we should, the ambition should be to drive that to zero.
Got it. Thank you guys so much for joining. DeFi Cheetah, I know that I said it in the beginning, weren't sure if you'd be able to make the entire call. I'm glad that you were. Josh, I'm sorry we were having internet issues, but I'm glad that we had you for, the solid 55 minutes that we did. Mark, thank you. You'll be joining me tomorrow on another episode of Blockchain Banter. Stefan, Bancor, CarbonDeFi senior advisor, is going to be joining us. You guys have put out a series of articles on your research that you had done. Pretty in-depth research on sandwich attacks specifically. So if this is a topic that interests you, you want to learn more about it and hear more about it, please join us tomorrow. It's going to be the same time, 12 p.m. UTC.